Okay, so now we have the record of continuing professional development. And the pilot test requirement for the record is that members record at least one activity. So you can see the instructions here in the top part. And you see this first row, basically row by row. What this form does is it collects information about the learning activities that you've engaged in. And so for the pilot, we would just like you to fill in at least one of these rows with at least one of the learning activities you've engaged in. And we're asking you to report on learning activities that you engaged in between January 1st and March 31st, 2016. So that's just about a 3-month time frame. And I've heard some feedback from people about that time frame saying, oh my goodness, that's too little time. I don't think I've done anything. I can't do a course in that much time, or courses are so expensive. How can you expect us to do this? So just to assure you, in the professional development guide, on pages 8 and 9, it talks about the learning activities that the committee considers as acceptable. And it's not just courses. It's actually a broad range of activities. So you may be doing some readings right now. Well, that might be an example of a self-study. Maybe you've read a journal article. That's something that you could record as an activity. So if for example, you're going to report a book or a journal as your learning activity for this 3-month time frame, then what you would do, starting on row 1, you could just write in say it's self-study or read a book, and write the name of the book and the author's name, and you can write the time frame in which you read that book. So maybe it was an article and you just read it on a specific date, or maybe it was a book and you read it, it took you an hour a day in January to read that book. So you'd write the number of hours. Some people have said, well, a book takes 10 hours to read. Is that, do you do some math to kind of, or weigh one learning activity as against another? Well, just record the number of hours. If it's a book, your best estimate of the number of hours. You can describe briefly what the book was about. And then didactic or experiential. So books, it's didactic learning. You're sitting down and receiving information that's not quite as interactive usually. And then did you complete it? Yes or no? Maybe you put the book down and it was really boring, or it wasn't related to your practice, or it just didn't turn out to be what you expected, and you want to close that. Well, that's fine. You can just click no, I didn't complete that activity, but here are the hours that I did related to it. And then the next column asks if the activity was related to your learning goals. Oh, wait, let me go back to the previous column about if you completed the activity. Maybe you're not done the book. Then you could check off the ongoing button. So this would even apply for a course. Maybe you have a course that goes beyond your submission deadline. Then you can just check off the ongoing button. And then just be sure that the number of hours, what we're looking for here is the number of hours you actually spent in the activity. So if it's a course and you expect to spend 36 hours in it, that's not the number you record there. Maybe you've only done 20 hours. So that's the number we want to see, is the 20 hours. Okay, so is the activity related to your learning goals, yes or no? You could have done things, taken advantage of opportunities that just sort of pop up, or, you have an interest that's not on your learning goal, and you've gone and done that activity. That's fine. If things that you do don't have to be documented necessarily or as a goal, or related to your goals. So you can just check that lunch and learn I did on Friday was not related to my learning goal. And then the final column is really the reflection column. And we wanted to get you thinking about whether this activity was relevant, if it was effective, if it did anything for you. So you can let us know that information by selecting yes or no. And then you can explain your answer there as well. Leanne, do you have anything you wanted to talk about with this?
No, I think a couple of things we'll get to when we talk about the criteria.
Okay. Okay, so, and I guess the last piece is just to let you know, because a couple of questions I've been dealing with are about the number of rows. There's only 8 rows in the form, you'll notice, and that's because we only contemplated that people would want to capture, you know, this 3 months time frame, and we thought, well, maybe that would be enough rows. But a lot of people have been contacting us and saying, well, you know, I really want to report all the activities I did since I joined on April 1st, 2015. That's fine if people want to do that, and that's, again, another example of people going well above and beyond the expectation of the pilot. People are welcome to use the form to keep track of all their learning activities since they first joined the college, but we won't be looking at your prior participation in learning activities. We're just going to be looking at activities that you completed in this time frame. So if you wanted to add more information and that it goes beyond the 8 rows, you would have to contact me. Just send me a quick email and I'll send you, I have a standalone version of this form and you can use that. Okay.
I have a question.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yes. It's a good time for questions. That brings that up.
Okay. In the initial phase of the outline for this, when it came to the learning, it said 40 hours. Do you want to, and yet when we opened this portion of the discussion, you said one example is fine for, you just want sort of a picture of what we, like these 3 months are designated because it gives you a snapshot, right?
Right.
So I'm not clear. Do you want 40 hours worth of learning activities here, or do you just want...
Okay, that's a really good question. So the answer is no, we don't require that members do 40 hours of learning for the pilot. You could just report one activity, or at least one activity, any number of hours.
Okay.
It would be pretty onerous. That 40 hours relates to a member's ongoing requirements. In fact, the first time... Whoop,
I'm sorry.
Yep, the first time anybody ever completes their and submits their tools, we wouldn't require them to do a certain number of hours. So you're all completing it for your first time. It's sort of the test time in this pilot, and then that 40-hour requirement kicks in between March 31st, 2016, and then either 2017 or 18 when you would next submit your tools.
Which brings me to part B of my ponderance. So professional development, I mean, it just goes hands in hands with being in the practice. I think that's a non-issue, but this 40 hours, so is that an every 24-month specific requirement? Is this...
It's a good question. We actually ask on the survey if members would prefer us to, and it's kind of, you know, this is a nuance in a way, but do we calculate 40 hours every 2 years or 20 hours every year? What's easier for members to keep track of? You know, because a person could say, go a year and a half and not do any professional development. I mean, I think it's rare. That's the rare person, but it could theoretically happen, and then try to catch up on 40 hours in 6 months, realizing that this is coming up. So we have been exploring whether to say 40 hours every 2 years or 20 hours a year, and then that at least 40 needs to be documented every 2 years. So that's on the survey. We're asking feedback from members on the survey. You tell us what you think on the survey. And we even ask about those numbers of hours if people feel it's too onerous, or if that seems okay. And then we ask people to tell us the number that they would like to see. So I have another question that I wanted to get to.
Thank you, Lily.
Oh, you're welcome. I have another question about experiential learning. And some people here have caught on to the typo. Yes, there's a typo in the form. It's supposed to be experiential. It says experimental. And people have asked about the difference. The difference between didactic and experiential learning. Didactic learning, if you think about that kind of learning that you're getting when you're attending a lecture, which is, you know, somebody's talking to you, it's a bit less interactive, a little bit less, well, it's less participatory. That would be an example of didactic learning. Experiential learning, on the other hand, is learning where you're involved in the experience. So maybe this is your meeting with your clinical supervisor. Or maybe it's a seminar you attended on learning a specific therapeutic technique, and there was a lot of role playing. So those are some examples of experiential learning. Another question I'm getting is about evidence, support in supplying supporting evidence. So in a way, this form is your evidence of engaging in professional development activities. Now, the committee has, and the college has required you to maintain evidence of your participation in activities, primary evidence. And so what we mean by that is if you got a certificate from the activity you engaged in, or if it's a self-study or a study group, then you could get a letter from a colleague in the study group, and so you're mutually sort of agreeing and corroborating that you've participated in the study group. If it's a book, then one of the things that you could do is make sure you keep track of the title, and if the book is connected with a clear self-study pathway, then you're going to have study notes. I mean, I usually do annotations in my books, so just keep those in your file. I suggest that you get together a folder, whether it's a paper version or a digital version on your computer, and just start throwing in things chronologically to keep things organized in that folder. And then someone made a note here in one of the in the question box about not a total, for each of these rows. So let me get my mouse here. But if you put in 10 hours here, 10 hours here, 15 here, there's no way to put in a total. That's fine. You don't need to add that up. Because the requirement is only that you put in one line. If you've added in one line for the pilot, then you've met the pilot requirements. I should say now, these forms will be transferred later on to a new format and then fully up and running on our portal system with a different kind of interactivity. So at that time, there would be a calculator and all that, a little bit more interactivity. So for now, this is the way things are because it's the format it's in, so there's no little calculator there.
Every 2 years we need to do this. Now, does the college actually send us a request for the information, or do we just need to submit and keep track of that ourselves every 2 years?
What we'll do is, as we approach, so it's going to be up to you to keep track of when you're required to submit. So we'll talk about how you know when you need to submit every 2 years. So it's up to you to keep track of that every 2 year schedule, but we will send reminders when we get close to one of those deadlines, about I think 3 to 5 months ahead of the deadline, to say, hey, the QA submission period is coming up. If you're even or if you're odd, you're going to be required to submit this year, and so hopefully that will help keep everyone on track. And if there's ever any confusion, you can just call us. Okay, so I'm going to bring us back to the slideshow then, Leanne. Okay, Leanne, and here's where you'll take us away.
Sure. Okay, so the college, as I said earlier, is required to actually confirm and monitor your participation in continuing education and professional development, and we have to do a peer and practice review. So the college has implemented, like all other colleges, a random selection process. So for those members that are required to submit their tools by the end of March, they'll be eligible for random selection. And we're going to be randomly selecting around 150 members to do a review of their actual professional development tools they submit. A subset of that group will also be required to go on to a peer and practice review. And the peer and practice review is a two-step process where if you're randomly selected to go through a review of your tools as well as the peer and practice review, you would have a remote interview and potentially submit documents. If the college identifies that a further in-depth assessment is required, then you would be asked to go on to an on-site assessment where we then review your records and your documentation practices and engage you in a further interview. We're looking at around 150 people who are randomly selected for the tool review, and then anywhere from 50 to 100 people for the random selection of the peer and practice review. Next slide. So if you're randomly selected for the tool review, the college will notify you and let you know that we're doing a review of your tool. And the college follows specific criteria. So the Quality Assurance Committee has defined what is complete and adequate. So under our regulations, it's clear that the committee has certain powers that if the tools are incomplete or inadequate, they have specific next steps, which we'll talk about in a minute. So the committee had to define, well, what is complete and adequate? So we're looking at a minimum that all forms are completed in a meaningful way. So we want people to, demonstrate that they actually took some time to reflect on their practice and that the goals are relevant to your practice, that you haven't selected goals of going on a vacation next year or learning how to knit. That we want to see that there's some thought process that has occurred and some self-reflection. So you have to complete all 3 sections of the self-assessment. The note section, as we said, is optional for the 3rd section, which is contemplation. And you have to have at least one goal noted and a couple points around the plan. How are you going to meet that goal? What steps are you going to take? And a lot of times when I look at goal setting, it's kind of a learning goal. What's your learning goal that you want to accomplish? And then the plan could be objectives. How are you going to do that? And then we do want to see some reflection. If you haven't completed that goal, then just reflect on where you're at now. And you could even reflect that, you haven't got as far as you would like, given the short amount of time, or there was particular roadblocks. Maybe the plan has changed. Maybe you've made changes to the plan because the initial plan is no longer relevant. Maybe your patient population changed. Maybe you changed in direction of your career. But do some type of reflection, and we recognize the short period of time for this first selection. Then in regards to the records of professional development, for the pilot test, as Lena said, we're only looking at that you've documented at least one learning activity and identifying if it's didactic or it's experiential, and if it is, what your reflection was. And again, in your reflection, we've asked you to note if it's how it enhanced or did it enhance your learning and your practice, and how did it impact your practice. And it's absolutely okay to say it didn't, that the learning activity really wasn't that effective for you. And we've all been to courses, or we've all attended different sessions, learning sessions, that it just wasn't what you anticipated, or that it maybe just reconfirmed what you already know. So you can just document that. That's absolutely fine to be scoring yourself low. It's fine to be putting no's. Again, we're just looking that you're actually engaging and reflecting in the learning that you're doing. After the pilot test, we will be asking you to keep track of 40 hours of learning, and that you have to have at least one didactic and one experiential activity. So it's a fairly basic criteria that the committee, again, just wants to see that you're actively engaged, but not just taking random activities, that there's actually a purpose to it and reflection. Then the next one. So once the process is that once you've been notified that you're going to have a review of your tools, the college staff works under that criteria that's been established by the Quality Assurance Committee and identifies any materials that may be incomplete or inadequate. Those are reviewed by the committee. And then the committee has several options under the Regulated Health Professions Act and the QA regulations on what actions they may take. So they may decide, oh, that is adequate enough, or that's complete enough. We're going to take no action. The member is exempted from any further review of the professional development tools for 4 years. If the committee decides that there is elements that are incomplete or inadequate, they could ask you to submit additional documentation or materials. So they might ask you for evidence of the learning activity. Maybe it's a continuing education certificate. Maybe it's a course outline if you indicate that you did some work around a presentation that you developed, and they might ask you to send in that outline or the PowerPoint. So they may ask for evidence of that learning. If some tools are incomplete, they may ask you to revisit it and complete the tools and resubmit, or they may ask you to submit future tools. They could ask you to submit, for the next 2 years, and that review will occur at that time. If there's evidence that they're incomplete or inadequate, the committee can also ask you to engage in the peer and practice review. And usually that's kind of reserved for people that have not taken an active initiative to engage in this reflection and the required professional development activities. And the principle around that is if we don't engage in self-reflection and professional development, then we can't confirm with the member that you're actually competent practitioners. So we're not saying that by engaging in learning activities you're actually competent, but what it does say to the public is that you're maintaining and taking steps to maintain your knowledge, skill, and judgment. And so if you haven't documented those activities, then we can't reassure the public that you're actually engaging in ongoing professional development and continuing education. So the committee may ask for more in-depth assessment to see if, is it that you just haven't documented, or you have engaged but you didn't reflect on it, or not, and you haven't engaged, and so we have to confirm that you are competent through a peer and practice review. For those members who fail to comply with the QA requirements, so usually that they don't submit, they, after several notices of reminder notices, there's usually some phone calls from college staff, the Quality Assurance Committee can refer that member to ICRC, which is a committee called Inquiries, Complaints, and Reports, and they may consider it professional misconduct. So under our regulations, if you don't engage in and meet the quality assurance requirements, then it can be considered professional misconduct. And then the committee, ICRC, would be doing some specific direction. Okay, next slide. If you are randomly selected to go through a review of your tools and a peer practice review, again, that notification will happen. And both notifications will occur at the end of April. And at that time, we'll review your tools and then start you on the process of scheduling a peer and practice review. The first part of the peer and practice review is that remote interview, so either a webinar like this or a telephone interview from a trained peer assessor. And you may be asked to submit specific documents about your practice. And then for some members, through that screening process, if we've identified that a more in-depth assessment is required, then we'll ask you to engage in an on-site assessment where the peer will meet with you face-to-face, most likely at your practice setting, and do another interview focusing on a particular client case and looking at your documentation practices, some confidentiality and privacy, maintaining records, and so on. I want to stress that the peer and practice review is also a pilot test process. So it's a new learning opportunity for our assessors as well as the members. And we do recognize that we'll be seeking and making changes on the tools and our processes through this first random selection. In regards to the pilot test of the professional development tools, I just want to remind everybody to please complete the feedback surveys that the college has provided. So there's a link that directs you to complete the feedback survey. And if you are randomly selected for a peer and practice review, please complete the surveys that we provide. It's going to inform the college on the changes that we need to make to ensure that this process is fair and transparent and that it is useful. So we want to make sure that we get enough feedback to inform where changes need to occur.
Right. Yeah, and I would like to underline that about the survey too. It's where we really find out if these tools are effective and working for you, and where we find that they're not, or people tell us that they're not, then we can modify them based on your feedback. Does anybody else have any questions about what we just talked about?
I have a question, and it's Susie, and unfortunately you may have answered it also in the time when I was not, the sound was cut out. It's about didactic versus experiential, and I'm thinking about something like peer supervision, where you might be getting feedback from other therapists about a way to go, which to me feels kind of didactic, but you also might be exploring, you know, what your countertransference was in the situation, and that feels a little more experiential. So is there a thinking on how that would be categorized?
So that's a really good question. I think it flows from the philosophy of making these tools work for you. It's up to you to decide. I don't think the committee has hard and fast lines about what's experiential and what's didactic. Rather, what the committee was trying to do when it sort of set that requirement is it was trying to get people engaged in activities that were not just classroom activities, you know, and not just sitting down and reading and taking in information. So then what I'll do is I'll dive into these frequently asked questions, and I'm just going over these to give people a sense of some of the things that are coming in, but also because they may be questions that you had in your mind. Just be aware that if you wind up having troubles with the form, try not to persist too much. It means that something happened in those early stages when you were getting started. We're going to post a video on our website shortly about using the form. You can even contact me after this if you're having technical difficulties with the form, or if you have experienced technical difficulties already, send me an email and we can talk quickly about finding solutions. And if you do wind up filling in half your form, and then you save it and you close it down, and then you go back and you find that the fields won't let you enter in any information, don't panic, okay? What I've been suggesting to people who encounter that situation is just to start a new one where you left off from the one before it. You know, keeping in mind that we want this pilot to be easy for people, not overly onerous. If you start experiencing too many difficulties, contact us first before you get too frustrated. And secondly, think if there are simple solutions that you can do, like doing part 1 and part 2 of a form, or maybe throwing some of your answers into a Word document and uploading that as your part 2. Sort of as an appendix to your form. Another question that we get a lot is my learning activity, you know, is this course, or I'm doing online courses, and these online courses don't give me a certificate. Is this considered an acceptable learning activity? For now, yes. The committee hasn't set any specific requirements for learning activities. It just gave examples in the professional development guide. If you look on pages 8 and 9, you'll see that list of examples there. And your activities don't need to be pre-approved, so you don't have to call the college and ask us about pre-approval. There's also no sort of ranking of activities, putting one at a higher standard than another. You know, these things might be considered down the road if there's a need for them, but right now the committee wanted to take in information, understand what was happening with members. It wanted to respect the diversity and the professional judgment and the things that people are already doing, and not come in and try to alter that dynamic. So that's all to keep in mind, is that if it's in the list of examples, record it. And we also ask in the survey, you know, because some things might not have made it in that list of examples, we ask in the survey if there are activities that are not included in the list that you feel should be included. So that's a great part about filling in that survey, is that's your opportunity to tell us what's missing. Okay, so we talked about this already, that the form only allows for 8 entries. So again, if you wanted to request a standalone copy because you wanted to add more entries, and it could be a part 2 to your submission, then just send me a quick email at qa@crpo.ca. You can see that email address on your screen. Okay, and then this final question talks about ongoing requirements. So this is the thing that I've been sort of tugging along at Number one, how is the pilot connected to your ongoing requirements? What do you do? And then in general, what can you expect coming forward? So there are a few pieces of information. Number one, we have this pilot format, which is not going to be our final format for these tools. Later on, we'll have a simpler format of the tools. It's easier to use. It'll be built into that QA page. So hopefully your experience will be that you can just log in, add in information whenever you need to, and then hit a save button, and then close that your internet browser down, and your stuff is saved in your account on the system. For now, we have these PDF forms. They're just a little bit different. Connecting your pilot to your ongoing requirements isn't too complicated. So I don't know if the people on the line have heard this bit of information yet, but your next participation deadline depends on your registration number. So if you look at your certificate of registration, which again, log into your account, you can access it. There's a tab called certificate. You can pop that up. You'll see your registration date. You'll see your registration number. If your registration number is odd, then the next time you're going to participate is in 2017. And we'll talk about what that looks like in a minute. If your number's even, then the next time that you participate, the next time you submit your tools, this is what I mean. So if you're odd, you submit your tools in 2017. And if you're even, you're next going to submit your tools in 2018. So between, say your registration number is odd, what do you do between March 31st, 2016 and March 31st, 2017? Well, what you're going to do is engage in learning activities in that year's time frame. Do you have to engage in 40 hours? No, that's far too many. Rather, the requirement is that you engage in a reasonable proportion of the 2 years. So that basically means at least 20 hours for that year. So while you're engaging in those 20 hours of learning activities between now and March 2017, you're just going to go into your record of professional development and update it. So you can use that PDF form and update it. You can use the standalone version. Or if you wanted to, you can wait. We'll have the final version of the tools available by the fall, or somewhere in the fall. And you can wait and put your learning activities in that record in the fall. You can update your learning plan regularly as well in that year's time span. And so yeah, if you want to make a learning plan that looks forward to March 31st, 2017, that's fine, but for the pilot it's not required. But just keep updating it, and then you'll submit that in March 2017 again. And then around the deadline, as you approach the deadline in 2017, you're going to do a new self-assessment. And so altogether, you're going to be submitting your your tracked learnings on that record of professional development. You'll be submitting an updated learning plan, and you'll be submitting your new self-assessment in 2017. If your number's even and you're submitting in 2018, then all that information carries forward. You're just doing it for a 2-year time span, and you're meeting 40 hours, at least 40 hours. And people who are 2 years out will have the benefit of having those tools, the final version of the tools, available to them sooner in their by the next time they're required to submit. So that's sort of your ongoing requirements. Whoops, sorry. That last piece, the last point I want to make is then you just submit every 2 years after that. So,
I have a question.
Okay. Yep.
So if we're submitting a learning plan from now until the end of March and also reporting on it, on the completion, my thing is even. So in 2 years from now, I'll be submitting another self-assessment, in which time will I again be submitting a plan for a time period that's already passed, or will it always be for?
You're always going to be starting a new you're always going to be doing a new self-assessment and starting a new plan. You're also always going to be submitting your old learning plan and your record of professional development.
So when I do my application, my thing in 2 years from now, I'll be starting a new learning plan, but I will be reporting on the learning plan that I'm submitting now?
In a way, yeah. We're hoping to make it a bit more seamless in the final version so that you won't even know, so that it actually doesn't matter that you're just continuously updating a learning plan.
Yeah, so what it is that, you know, let's put some dates to it. Let's say that I start a learning plan in April 1st, 2016. You're not required to submit until April 2017. So the college just wants to confirm that you've actually did that plan over the last 2 years.
So I need to, in order to be a good member of the college, even though I'm not submitting for 2 years, I need to come up with a plan at the beginning of those 2 years.
That is the goal, and we recognize that some people do it retroactively and document when they've been notified they have to submit or when their time comes up. But really, the most effective way of using kind of a plan and self-assessment is documented at the time, and then make it a fluid document that you constantly update it, and you add in new activities as you go along over those 2 periods versus waiting to fill them out at the last minute, you know, the 31st of the end of the month.
And then in 2 years' time, when I go through, let's say everyone thought this process was perfect and nothing's really changed about it, when I go through the system, I would be thinking about coming up with a learning plan for the next 2 years, and I wouldn't be required to report on my progress of that learning plan until the following 2 years were up.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
So even though you're submitting in April or the end of March, you may decide that you want to keep using that same goal, that's the goal that you want to expand on or continue, or you want to add another goal to that document. That's fine as well. And even the self-assessment, you could keep that data and just update it in you know, for the next 2 years. So again, and then of course the learning activities log would continue on as well. So we recognize that it's a short period of time, so you don't have to start from scratch this time, but as part of the pilot test, you can kind of continue on with what work you've been doing on that.
That's right. Yeah, and we'll find a way later on, because admittedly the tools will be in a bit of a different format. We're not going to expect members to go out and retype everything and transfer it over. That's not going to be it. We're going to find a way to simplify that so that you can have there's that old version and then the new version, and that we'll know to go and check between the two. So I'm just trying to say, don't feel you need to duplicate things or go ahead and type things out. We'll accept things in sort of the format that they're in, and that the next year will be a little bit, may feel a little bit different because of the two formats, but that things will be more seamless going forward. All right, Leanne, I don't know if there are any more questions, and if there aren't,
I think we're good.
okay. All right, Leanne, then I guess I'll just close this up by saying thank you to everyone for joining us. And we've got some feedback too on the tools in this session, which I appreciate. And I hope that you're able to take this information with you to use the tools, adapt them, see them through your lens, and that you can do that with greater comfort and more confidence. Leanne, any final words?
Great. Thank you, everybody, for your participation.